Every year, the nation sets one day aside to celebrate the freedom that God gave it. It's called July 4th. But did you know that the Declaration was filed on July 1st? And that John Adams wrote to his wife and said that July 2nd was going to be the greatest day in the history of America. And did you know that God had separate plans for that? And that's why it was held off till July 4th. And we're going to tell you that story today in the special edition of God's Unchanging Word, News, Nuggets, and Insights. So sit back and get ready because we've got a lot of information.
And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word. And as we told you in our little intro, this is a special for the 4th of July. So today is Friday, June 28th, 2019, and this is our 4th of July special for all our viewers. We're also going to talk about some news events. Of course, we're going to keep it kind of brief so we can spend more time talking about the 4th. We're going to talk about weather, hit and run like a sniper. So when you look at the weather events and all the calamities that's been taking place, it's almost as if a sniper has been taking shots at the United States and just continuing to slow it down. Then we're going to talk about following the money. In this episode, we're going to go a little bit further, talking about silver, as we've talked about in the last 2 programs. And then we're actually going to get into our Nuggets portion of July 4th and Tammuz 17. And if you've been watching our program and following God's Unchanging Word for the last couple of years, you know how important Tammuz 17 is. It centers around the warnings that God has laid at the very foundations of this nation. So you ready? Let's get right into our program. Let's begin with a little video first of who can you not start with but John Wayne. America and why I love her. Let's take a look at that video and I'll be right back.
You ask me why I love her? Well, give me time and I'll explain. Have you seen a Kansas sunset or an Arizona rain? Have you drifted on a bayou down Louisiana way? Have you watched the cold fog drifting over San Francisco Bay? Have you heard a Bob White calling in the Carolina pines or heard the bellow of a diesel in the Appalachia mines? Does the call of the Niagara thrill you when you hear her waters roar? You look with awe and wonder at her Massachusetts shore where men who braved a hard new world first stepped on Plymouth Rock. Do you think of them when you stroll along a New York City dock? Have you seen a snowflake drifting in the Rockies way up high? Have you seen the sun come blazing down from a bright Nevada sky? You hail to the Columbia as she rushes into the sea, or bow your head at Gettysburg, our struggle to be free? Have you seen the mighty Tetons who watched an eagle soar? Have you seen the Mississippi roll along Missouri's shore? Have you felt a chill at Michigan when on a winter's day her waters rage along the shore in thunderous display? Does the word aloha make you warm? Do you stare in disbelief when you see the surf come roaring in at Waimea Reef? From Alaska's cold to the Everglades, from the Rio Grande to Maine, my heart cries out, my pulse runs fast, the might of her domain. You ask me why I love her? I've a million reasons why. My beautiful America, beneath God's wide, wide sky.
There's no program about America can be complete without bringing in the Duke, who typifies what America is all about. And when you look at the beauty and the majesty of what God gave this nation, would you realize that God promised 4,000 years before we ever came here that this would be saved for His greatest nation to bring about the return of Jesus Christ? Now, there's one more that I need to bring out before we actually get into the actual news portion of our program. That's Red Skelton. How can any other program be complete without Red Skelton? Talking about the Pledge of Allegiance. Take a look. I'll be right back.
I remember a teacher that I had. Now, I went through the 7th grade. I went to the 7th grade. And I left home when I was 10 years old because I was hungry. And I used to, this is true. I work in the summer and I go to school in the winter. But I had this one teacher. He was the principal of the Harrison School in Vincennes, Indiana. To me, this was the greatest teacher, a real sage of my time, anyhow. He had such wisdom. And we were all reciting the Pledge of Allegiance one day. And he walked over, this little old teacher. Mr. Laswell was his name. Mr. Laswell. And he says, he says, I've been listening to you boys and girls recite the Pledge of Allegiance all semester, and it seems as though it's becoming monotonous to you. If I may I recite it and try to explain to you the meaning of each word? I, me, an individual, a committee of one, pledge. Dedicate all of my worldly goods to give without self-pity. Allegiance, my love and my devotion to the flag, our standard, Old Glory, a symbol of freedom. Wherever she waves, there's respect, because your loyalty has given her a dignity that shouts, freedom is everybody's job. United. That means that we have all come together. States, individual communities that have united into 48 great states. 48 individual communities with pride and dignity and purpose. All divided with imaginary boundaries, yet united to a common purpose. And that's love for country. And to the Republic, a state in which sovereign power is invested in representatives chosen by the people to govern. And government is the people, and it's from the people to the leaders, not from the leaders to the people, for which it stands. One nation, meaning so blessed by God, indivisible, incapable of being divided, with liberty, which is freedom, the right of power to live one's own life without threats, fear, or some sort of retaliation, and justice, the principle or qualities of dealing fairly with others, for all, which means, boys and girls, it's as much your country as it is mine. And now, boys and girls, let me hear you recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since I was a small boy, 2 states have been added to our country, and 2 words have been added to the Pledge of Allegiance: under God. Wouldn't it be a pity if someone said that is a prayer and that would be eliminated from schools too?
Little did he know that when he said those words, that those words would become prophetic, because it was in 1962, on this week, that the Supreme Court ruled that prayer could no longer be a part of our school system. This week, as you celebrate the July 4th with family and friends, or you're out barbecuing, take a moment, bring in the kids, bring in the grandchildren, and let them watch those 2 little videos we just showed you, because our heritage is being eaten away, and they need to see the love and the foundation of this nation the way it was intended by God Almighty Himself. All right, let's move on now. The focus of this week, and this was going to be a long run, but I'm just going to shorten it here so that we can spend more time with the July 4th. But I didn't want to go another week without bringing in Iran, talking about the escalating conflict of what's going on there. Talking about Iran trying to drive the United States into a war. In the United States, they want the United States to retaliate. They want the administration to step up to create a war, to bring in the UN so that they can become the victims again and have everybody against the United States. And as they do that, they're bringing about the threats of the nuclear weapons once again. The current Iranian escalation that's going on right now, talking about the war on the horizon. In May 12th, 4 commercial ships off the coast of the United Arab Emirates was last month that the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the UK blamed Iran. Of course, they denied it at first, but the proof was not deniable. The UAE says that the 4 commercial ships suffered the acts of sabotage in the Persian Gulf. When they didn't get the reaction from the United States that they expected, they escalated the problem again. By June 13th, 2 oil tankers were attacked in the Straits of Hormuz. Now, this brought it a little closer to home because almost 30% of all the oil goes through those straits where they attack those tankers. And if they can shut down the Straits of Hormuz, they can drive the price of oil up, as the United States would step in and bring down the calamity around the rest of the world to hate the United States and make themselves the victim. And they'll do it through the UN, which today is primarily ruled by the Iranian-type people or the Arabs. They have this incredible power with the Arab League and the United Nations. And that's what's going on right now in the Middle East. So now, going on. So what happens now? The U.S. approves military retaliation but holds back, which was, I think, an incredible act of control by the United States. Chooses to use the cyber attack on the military, and now they're saying that that's not proper. The U.S. now imposes new sanctions beginning this past Monday, June 24th. What they're trying to do is bring the country back to where it was before the previous administration, Obama, give them $150 billion where people were protesting in the streets demanding a regime change. And that's what they're trying to do right now. Because until you change the regime, you're going to continue with the same problems we have today. But of course, as we here at God's Unchanging Word have been prophesying and talking about from God's holy word itself, that these problems in the Middle East will not be resolved till Jesus Christ comes back. Because the scripture says in Luke, when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, so that means as we get closer and closer to the end time, the problems are not going to go away, they're going to escalate. And that's what's going on right now. Now, Iran, at this stage of this program, is threatening to shoot down more U.S. drones. So they're trying to drag the United States into a war, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, because they need the help, the support, and the money from the rest of the world, like China and Russia and the UN. So we'll see what's happening, but I didn't want another program to go by without at least mentioning to you to keep this on your radar and to pray about it. June 2019, this is coming this Friday. By the time you get this program, they will be having the summit, the G20, at Osaka with the summit with Iran casting a huge shadow on the meeting. So there's going to be a lot of talk about what's going on in the Middle East, including tariffs by this administration. So as you know, as we've been covering, the world is getting more and more in this ball that it can't resolve its issues that Luke 21, verse 25 talks about. So we'll talk about more of that as we go. So the second thing I want to talk about, weather. Something we need to really pay a lot of attention to is talking about the weather. So as I was watching it, it's like a sniper. You ever see a group or an army or you're on a mission and they have these little snipers in trees and bushes and they keep taking out a little piece here, a little piece there. Well, that's what the weather looks like it's doing. It's like Satan is looking at the United States and it's like a sniper, just hit and run, hit and run, hit and run. And the lingering effects are costing our nation billions and billions of dollars. They're not seen as much right now as long as the United States can run up the debt, right? And insurance companies have money to pay claims. But what happens when all of that runs out? That's what we need to pay attention to. So now I'm going to have two videos here I want to talk about. The first one that I'm going to bring up right now is showing the lingering effects of months ago, what took place as we saw the winter storms. And we told you when those winter storms begin to defrost going down the river, and also the flooding that took place in the belt of America, the breadbasket of America. All of those now coming downriver. So take a look at this video and look at the Mississippi River. I'll be right back.
It's been the wettest 12 months in recorded history here in the United States. Look at the waters here on the mighty Mississippi. Remember all those floods up in Nebraska and Iowa and then Oklahoma and Arkansas? Well, all that water now making its way here to New Orleans, one of the most important ports in America.
For South Louisiana, troubles became all too real back in May when the Bonnet Carré Spillway was opened to relieve rising waters on the Mississippi.
First time we've ever opened it twice in the same year. Also the first time we've ever opened it in back-to-back years.
Since March, the historic flooding has inundated millions of acres of agricultural land across the Midwest and South, causing widespread damage to levees, dams, bridges, and roads.
I've never seen that much rain. I've never seen it in my life. I mean, when I tell you it poured, it poured. They say 7 to 9 inches of rain up there in a day. I've never seen that much rain in my life.
Captain Michael Bopp runs a company that helps huge cargo ships like this one navigate into the port of New Orleans.
I've been on the river for 40 years, so I, in my entire career, have not seen it this bad and this high and this strong.
Because of the silt and sediment being pushed down the river, the waters that wind through New Orleans and out to the Gulf of Mexico are more shallow, creating a major danger for pilots and commerce.
The Mississippi River drains 32 states and 2 Canadian provinces. So it's just a lot of velocity of water, a lot of volume. I think it's going to recede. I hope it recedes before August. I felt like mid-July it may go down. I'm having second thoughts on the forecast right now.
The same goes for the Army Corps of Engineers, who are contemplating opening another spillway if more rain gives rise to the already high river.
Here at this point of the Mississippi River, we are draining 41% of the United States. Flows right past this point.
And one of the most unnerving aspects of this high river level is the fact that hurricane season is upon us. Any tropical storm that came through here right now or in the next month could easily challenge the levees built here by the Army Corps of Engineers. We can only hope that the water recedes by the time that hurricane season actually is in full throttle. I'm Robert Ray on the mighty Mississippi.
That's just one area. Now try to multiply this, what's going on around the country. So now, let's talk about the lingering effects of what takes place. Because when an event happens and then the rest of the country moves on, the news simply gets to a new story. But the effects live on forever. One of the things I remembered the most that really struck me in my mind after Hurricane Katrina is that I would get calls from people months after Hurricane Katrina. And a year later or 2 years later, and people would say, are y'all still fooling with that? I thought that was over. Not realizing that the damage would take decades, not just one decade, but decades, and some areas would never recover again. What's going on around the nation as we see the hit and run, a hurricane here, a storm there, a flood here, is that as the news stories goes on, the pain and the suffering that continues to go on with the people, that lingers on. Not just in cost of dollars, but in cost of lives, in the agriculture, and everything that changes following that. That takes years and years and years to rebuild. And that's what I'm talking about in this segment, because you see, Satan is like a sniper. He's taking out our resources. He's taking out our hope. He's taking out the foundation of what this nation is all about. Let me show you now. You with me? All right, let's go on a little bit further. Take a look at this. All right, I'm talking about here. This is Hurricane Michael. I'm talking about one area now, Hurricane Michael. All right, right here. So Hurricane Michael right here. This is 2018. Everything you see on that picture, let's bring that picture back up again, Jeff. Everything in that picture are $1 billion or more of damage. You see them around the nation? You got, all right, so now you got the fires out west, you have the storms, the hail, you had drought that's been taking place, you had the Hurricane Michael, you had the Hurricane Florence in September, and that wiped out a lot of North Carolina, South Carolina. They haven't recovered yet. So you can go around the country, you can see all of that. So now let's take, as I showed one river, let's take just a look at one industry from one hurricane now, from 2018, is Hurricane Michael, right? Hurricane Michael. The Florida timber industry literally is rotting away, as the headlines read. Hurricane Michael wipes out 3 million acres of trees. 3 million acres of trees in a path of destruction. Let's play that video. I'll be right back.
When Hurricane Michael ripped through the Florida Panhandle last October, it devastated that state's timber industry. Now, 8 months later, 3 million acres of flattened timberland is literally rotting away. Some farmers say federal aid might not be enough to cover the damages, leaving many uncertain about their futures. Ali Rafa explains.
Today it's worth $0.
Timber farming is in Will Leonard's DNA.
5 generations of my family have worked in the forests of Calhoun County.
But the devastation left by Hurricane Michael could make him the last.
That's 60 years worth of work and effort that was destroyed in about 3.5 hours.
Little has changed more than 8 months after Michael's Category 5 force winds left Leonard's trees snapped like matchsticks and plowed down hundreds of acres of his decades-old timber. His land just a fraction of the nearly 3 million acres of flattened timberland in the Florida Panhandle. The storm leaving over $1 billion in damage and enough rotting wood to wrap around the earth 3 times. The federal government has promised nearly $500 million in recovery funding.
To encourage them to clear their land and not to abandon their land and then replant and reforest, we've got to give them that extra help.
But some farmers have to dig deeper into their pockets before feeling any relief.
It's very much needed and appreciated, but there are many in the area that simply will not have the 25% match that's required to move forward with these federal programs. So many are left with very tough decisions.
And time is running out. Growing concerns over potential wildfires plague farmers who can't clear their downed trees fast enough as the slow-going cleanup process continues into the summer months. But through it all, Leonard maintains hope for the next generation.
May 14th, my wife Morgan and I welcomed our first son, Mac, and my hope would be that he'd have an opportunity to be involved in the timber industry.
Even with the new federal aid, it's expected to take over a decade for the state's hurricane-ravaged timber industry to return to where it was pre-Michael. In Bluntstown, Florida, Ali Rafa, Fox News.
Now, what you don't realize is what you just saw was prophetic. God talked about this. Now, he talked about your land would lay waste if the nation didn't repent. He said the land would lay waste. And what would happen? They said the wild animals would begin to come back and take over. You look at areas like this, as they talked about hoping the people won't let the land lay waste, where they're trying to come up with $500 million to be able to just clear trees. Can you imagine that? $500 million just to clear trees. This is just one problem, one area with one hurricane. Then you got all along the coastline. It looks like New Orleans all over again as they're trying to rebuild. So I'm talking about hit and run. So we're going to ask our team here to try to begin putting together all the disasters and talk about showing it around our country, around our borders, as God said he's going to take away our hedge of protection and begin to put all this together beginning in 2015, where we began to see everything changing in this world. So we're going to continue to put that on. Now, but now stay with me here. Let's go a little bit further, all right? So now that was 2018. That was last year. Look at 2019. I still got the same map up. So in 2019 already, there's over 2 areas of over $1 billion claims. The winter storms that took place, you're now beginning to see that come down the river right now. All these areas up there, in one case they had over 1 million calves. Remember that? 1 million calves died, destroyed, drowned from that storm. Just a month later, what else happened? Spring flooding. Spring flooding like they've never seen it again. So what do we look at? Take a look at this picture. All around the country, around the borders, we're seeing our hedge of protection taken away. And then in the very heart of the breadbasket of this country, our growing, the farmers now are losing billions and billions of dollars of food and crops that they can't do anything with. This is just the beginning. This is 2019. So now, let's go back now to where we started in 2018. Let's take a look at that in comparison now, just for a chart here over the last couple years. This is just a quick recap of the things that we're going to get into on this program that we're going to be talking about in the sermons and talking about roaring seas of what's going on that people aren't taking awareness because it's all biblically based. It's all in the Bible. Now, let's take a look at the average, right? Here's the average, right? The average cost from 1980 to 2018, right? That's costing billions of dollars. Are you ready for that? Look how low the average cost is. All those years, look how low that is, right? See that? The average, right? Now look at 2018. There's 2018. Look how the price went up. We're talking billions and billions of dollars, how the price went up, right, in 2018. But look here. 2005, Hurricane Katrina. But look at 2017. Look at 2017, where 2017 went. It's off the charts. What happened in 2017? All right, let's talk about that. You have the hurricane over in Texas. They haven't recovered from that. That's still billions of dollars, and people still don't have their homes built. I mean, they're still in the worst flooding they ever had over in Texas. And that's just one part of Texas because it came in another part over there that just wiped out the coast. All right, so that's just one area. Then you head down in Florida. They haven't recovered down in Florida yet. And then you had Hurricane Maria. So in just 2017, there's like this fury of weather events that just blew up. So what in the world's taking place? How about in the West? Look at the fires. They set record fire damages in 2017. Then you had up top in North Dakota, South Dakota, the drought. Again, in the growing basket of America. So now, what's going on here? What happened in 2017? Let's take one scripture that we have been working on and trying to understand for the last 4 years. Luke 21:25. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. 2017. Now, what God showed us there is that it is a biblical forecast of God showing us a type of His return. That's what you're looking at. That's Revelation 12 spelled out in the stars. At the same time, in the same verse, and upon the earth, distress of the nations, with perplexity the sea and the waves roaring. The sea being the unconverted, those who are in this world, and the waves roaring is the continual increase of problems and occurrences like in the weather. So if you were looking at this with spiritual eyes, what we would see that as God laid out a plan for the beginning of His return, you're beginning to see the anger of Satan retaliating to try to stop it. Why is 2017 so bad? Because God's hands is in this and Satan is trying to rebel. Now, people can deny it all they want to, but we're going to spell it out. We're going to put this together in black and white over the next few months and do a lot more in these programs. And we're going to show you that every time God had a plan, Satan had a problem. Do you ever notice those who keep the holy days that around your holy days, there seems to be more illness, more sickness, and more problems? Because God is having His plan, and Satan hates it, and he tries to destroy God's people. And like somebody told me, like the Feast of Tabernacles, for those who don't go to the feast, and said, if Satan can't keep you from going to the feast, he's going to try to make you have a miserable time while you're there. Well, it's the same thing about the return. So now, I'm going to close this section out with the question. Any wonder why 2030 is on everybody's mind? If you looked at that, would Satan know he has but a short time? I think so. We'll talk about that as we go forward. All right, one more segment, then we'll get back into the 4th of July. The central bank purchases, we've been talking about that now for a couple of weeks. So now, let's pick up what we talked about last week with the silver, right? This is the silver, April 2011. And what we were trying to show you is a way that you can help prepare and invest a little bit to have some gain when the whole world's falling apart, and showing you how you can at least pick up on a few dollars, help pay bills, maybe help buy food. No, it's not going to save you. And eventually, at some point in time, yes, they're going to throw it into the streets. I understand all that. This is not a catch-all scenario for it's going to cure and save anybody, because only Jesus Christ is going to do that. But here's what I wanted to show you. In November 2018, the average price was $14.32 from a high of 2011. In June now of this year, the price was averaging $14.74. Not a big difference, but what was the difference? Is the escalation in tension in the world. The price of silver goes up. Look at February 2008, $24, and that came up from really way down in 2008 of $11.48. What was the difference? The difference here was the economy was beginning to crack. Here in October, they said they had everything fixed. We told everybody in the newsletters, and we can go back and show you in the videos and the sermons we gave, they lied to you. We told you in advance they were lying to you. Sure enough, everything fell apart, and look where it went. $55.21. The Fed said in October 2008 that they had everything under control. At the Feast of Tabernacles, at every feast site I went to, we told them they're lying to you. You need to protect yourself. You know, don't take this for granted. So now, at the Feast of Tabernacles, we told everyone. In fact, the following year, somebody told me that they had like $50,000 put aside, that they were going to go back to school, him and his wife. They literally pulled all their money out. And the next year, they told me how much they really appreciated. And somebody actually listened. And they had all their money. They didn't lose anything. And so what I'm trying to show you now is that God warns his people when things are coming. Today, with an average of $15 an ounce, it could easily go up 4 times and more. So many people are predicting that silver is going to go up at least 10 times the value when the economy gets really bad. I know it's at some point you're not going to be any good to you, but let's suppose you did go up 4 times or 10 times, that you could just sell it before everything collapses completely while the pressure's still going on. You could pay off a bill, pay off a house, pay off a car. Isn't it worth trying? Isn't it worth trying? Because you could save your money and put it in dollars, but the dollars are going to lose value. They're not going to gain value. So let me give you just one example how fast things move from last week to this week. All right, here we go. On Tuesday, when we do our program, just like today, we taped the price was $14.83 for silver. That was on Tuesday. Just 2 days later, Iran shoots down a drone. The world gets real tense, and the price of silver went to $15.55 in 2 days. That's just 2 days. That Friday, it came down to $15.42. Now, I don't know what it is today, and I don't know what it'll be by Friday, but all I'm bringing this out to show you something. One incident resolved fairly quickly right now. Still a little uncertainty what's going to go on. Look what happened. And it's just one incident. Just imagine what's going to take place when the stock market begins to fall, right? And so people are going to look for a safe haven. Where's it going to go? It's going to go to precious metals, gold, silver, platinum. Now, I'm using silver because God's people don't have a lot of money. So you're not going to get a lot of gold. In fact, they're buying up gold. The countries are buying up gold today. What I'm showing you here is a mindset, is that we, as God people, need to think ahead to prepare. God did it with Joseph, and he told him how to do it. And we're going to begin talking about how we can do it today. Alrighty, let's get ready to take a break. We're going to come back in just a few minutes. We're going to go into our Nuggets portion of the program. But today we're going to take a break. We're going to watch a video, the United States Independence Day. And when we come back, we're going to talk about July 4th, how it ties into, in God's calendar, Tammuz 17. Take a look, and I'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, we took our first half of the program to bring you the historical perspective of the United States. But now let's take in a biblical perspective of the United States on July 4th. We tie it in with God's calendar and God's timing. July 4th and Tammuz 17. Now, a lot of people don't realize what Tammuz 17 is. Just briefly, it's like we have a calendar of July. God has a calendar called Tammuz. And the Tammuz, like we have July 4th, Tammuz, the 17th day. It's historic in God's plan. It is even worse for the Jewish nation. It's a day that the Jewish people begin a 3-week mourn or 3-week fast in many cases. All right, so let's talk about that now. 2015, let's go back to 2015. As I mentioned about the weather, we're going to put things together from 2015 because that has a lot of significance in God's plan of what's taken place, especially when you look at the United States. On June 26 in the United States, it was called Tammuz 9 on God's calendar. Historically, it has a significant role of importance. July 4th, same year, Tammuz 17. These two dates go down in history as a calamity for the nation of the Jews. In 586, Tammuz 9 is when the walls were breached with the beginning of the fall of Jerusalem in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, 70 AD, Tammuz 17 was the breaching of the walls of the New Testament. So this is very significant. And both of these events show the calamity of God's people. June 26, Tammuz 9, that was the day that the United States approved the same-sex marriage in this nation. Both of these temples fell on the 9th of Av, just a few weeks later. Why is that important? Because the Supreme Court could have ruled any day of that month. They could have ruled the day before, they could have ruled on the 22nd, but they chose the 26th to bring out the ruling for same-sex marriage, gay marriage as the approval, because it was God's plan to show this nation its warning that if they ever turned its back, it would be a calamity to this nation. And that's exactly what happened. Just as in the Old Testament, when the people turned their backs on God, the temple walls fell. The breach took place on Tammuz 9. Tammuz 9 is the breach of the walls of the protection of God's people in this nation was now breached so that Satan could attack this nation and God removing his protection. July 4th was Tammuz 17. Tammuz 17, again, the same thing. In the New Testament, the Jews had turned their back on God. He breached the walls and the protection for that nation. This nation was established July 4th, 1776. On that day, in God's calendar, was Tammuz 17. It's so that God gave the blessings to this nation and warned them at the same time that if we ever turned our back on him, that our calamity would be no different than it was in the Old Testament and the New Testament and the breaching of our walls of protection. So look here let me read Genesis 32, 26 through 28. But before I do that, let me go back to the weather thing we just talked about. The breaching of the walls of the protection is not just physical, it's spiritual. God's showing us physically how this nation is being destroyed. And now we're looking at how God's going to just allow us to be destroyed spiritually at the same time. So who is America? All right, so God tells us here in Genesis 32, he says, this is when Jacob was wrestling with God. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. And he says, I will not let you go, that except that you bless me. What a fortitude of an individual. So he said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. So he said, your name shall no more be called Jacob, but shall be called Israel. For as a prince you have power with God and with men, and have prevailed. So what God took was the name of Jacob, and he gave him the new name Israel, all right? So that's important to understand. People today think Israel is the Jewish nation that's over in the Middle East, and it's not. The Jews are just one tribe of the tribes of Israel, right? Just like the United States has many states, each state is not America. Each state, you have Alabama, you have Louisiana, you have the northern states. Every state is just one part of the nation of America, just as Judah, the Judean people, are just one tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel. So now, going on, Israel's name. So Genesis 48, verse 16. So the angel, he said, which redeemed me from all evil, blessed the lads. Now we're talking about Joseph's sons. So as God gave Jacob the name Israel, he passed on from Joseph to Joseph's sons. So now Jacob's talking about his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So this is what God inspired Jacob to bless the lads as. He says, and bless the lads and let my name be on them. And let the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. As we understand, following the events of history and prophetic fulfillment, we believe in this church that the United States and Great Britain fulfill the prophecies and the blessings of Ephraim and Manasseh in the United States and Great Britain. We talk about that more, and I'm going to show you in the sermon that we're offering this month that you can get, talking a lot more about that than I have time to do here. This is found in the blessings of the tribes found in Genesis 49. Israel, verse 10. It says, moreover, now you need to understand now where I'm at now. I'm in 2 Samuel 7, verse 10. I go into this detail in the sermon that I'm going to offer you in just a few minutes that you can write in for, that you need to understand where this world doesn't know. 2 Samuel, when God was talking to King David, the nation of Israel was established. They were at their height of their glory under King David, eventually given to King Solomon. They were in the promised land, right? So now, God's taken Israel, who's in the promised land, and he tells King David this. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, future tense, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more, and neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. So what we're looking at here is while they're in the place that God promises as the promised land, that he was moving them. So what we're looking at in the Old Testament is simply the type, and the antitype is the United States and Great Britain, which was fulfilled later, as we understand that. So I go into a lot more detail in that sermon, so hang tight, and I'm going to show you that sermon in just a few minutes. Almost 4,000 years later, those prophecies that were fulfilled from Genesis took place in the United States itself. So now, let's talk about the date, because the date's just as important as the year. The actual date, July 2nd. What has that got to do with the 4th of July? Take a look at this. This is absolutely amazing. The actual birth date of the American Republic was July 2nd. Do you know that? July 2nd, when the delegates of the Continental Congress meeting in Pennsylvania in Philadelphia approved the resolution on June 7th, 1776, with Richard Henry of Virginia calling for independence of Great Britain. It was introduced on the 1st. It was being approved on the 2nd. It was actually being approved on the 2nd. It said that these united colonies and of right ought to be free and independent states. All right, so they reworded a little bit of it from the 2nd. All right. 2 days later, the body adopted the more well-known Declaration of Independence, which justified the deed by declaring that the causes which would impel them for the separation. But this had significance in God's plan because it had to fall on the day of warning, so that we would look back to our roots when God says, I'm going to give you the blessings that are promised from Jacob through Joseph and through his sons. They're going to be fulfilled at the end time. And the warning is that when we look back, if we ever turned our backs on God, he would take his hand and remove it from these great states. You are seeing that prophecy being fulfilled right now as we continue to throw God away from this nation, continually being destroyed, continually. So now, the declaration, the approval. On July 2nd, John Adams wrote this. This is the day after the Congress voted to declare independence. John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, declaring that the second day, July 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. So he thought it was all going to happen on July 2nd, but God had other plans, because God always looks at the roots. God always brings us back to our heritage. God always brings us back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He goes back when he protects and he says, because of my promise to Abraham, I'm not going to destroy you. So God always goes to the roots. And he wanted this nation, when it was founded, to be able to look at its roots and said, I warned you when I gave you the blessings. It's like talking to a child. I'm going to give you this now, but if you misuse it, I'm going to take it away from you. Well, that's what God's doing to this great nation. Right, going on, he says, I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. Where is that today? Where is that today on the 4th of July? All right? Solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. They don't want to even talk about God. In fact, if you talk about God, they want to stone you and throw you out. All right? Going on, it says, it ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade and shows and games and sports and guns and bells and bonfires and illuminations from the end of this continent to the other, from this time and forever. What incredible patriotism. The freedom that they fought. They were just beginning their fight. They had a long battle, and most of these guys lost everything they had, and many of them lost their lives, as we're going to show you in a piece by Paul Harvey before we close our program. Our Destiny, the Transforming of a Nation, George Washington wrote, individuals in entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. It is at all times difficult to draw with precision the line between those rights which must be surrendered and those which may be preserved. All right, that's from George Washington. Compare how the Apostle Paul wrote pretty much the same thing. In fact, if you look at most of the founding documents, you will find that they have their roots built in biblical principles. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 7, for he that is called in the Lord being a servant is the Lord's freeman. Likewise also is he that is being called being free is Christ's servant. So as we, as God's people, choose to follow him, we give up our freedom to become servants to Jesus Christ, to do his will, not ours. And that is what you were looking at from George Washington, giving up their solemn freedom to be able to serve the nation as a whole. Would that be true today in the nation we live? So now, let's talk about that in a video by Paul Harvey. And in this, let me get back to that. There we go, Paul Harvey. All right, in the video, it's talking about the signers of the Declaration. Let's play that video, and I'll be right back.
Americans, the how and the why of our beloved republic are so much better known and understood than the who. The United States of America was born in 1776, but it was conceived 169 years before that. The earliest settlers had watered the New World with much sweat. They had built substantial holdings for themselves, for their families. And when the time came to separate themselves from a tyranny an ocean away, at best it meant starting all over again after the ravages of war. Researching what you're about to hear gave a whole new dimension to my reverence for our nation's first citizens. All others of the world's revolutions, before and since, were initiated by men who had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Our founders had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except one thing. But for any eve of the 4th of July, I, Paul Harvey, do herewith bequeath unto you something to remember. You may not be able to quote one line from the Declaration of Independence at this moment. Henceforth, you'll always be able to quote at least one line. It's in the last paragraph where you will recall when I remind you. It says, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In the Pennsylvania State House that's now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the best men from each of the colonies sat down together. This was a very fortunate hour in our nation's history, one of those rare occasions in the lives of men when we had greatness to spare. These were men of means, well-educated. 24 were lawyers and jurists. 9 were farmers, owners of large plantations. On June 11, a committee sat down to draw up a Declaration of Independence. We were going to tell the British fatherland no more rule by redcoats. Below the dam of ruthless foreign rule, the stream of freedom was running shallow and muddy. And we were going to light a fuse to dynamite that dam. This pact, as Burke later put it, was a partnership between the living and the dead and the yet unborn. There was no bigotry, there was no demagoguery in this group. All had shared hardships. Jefferson finished a draft of the document in 17 days. Congress adopted it in July, and so much is familiar history. But now, King George III had denounced all rebels in America as traitors. Punishment for treason was hanging. The names now so familiar to you from the several signatures on that Declaration of Independence, the names were kept secret for 6 months, for each knew the full meaning of that magnificent last paragraph in which his signature pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. 56 men placed their names beneath that pledge. 56 men knew when they signed that they were risking everything. They knew if they won this fight, the best they could expect would be years of hardship in a struggling nation. And if they lost, they'd face a hangman's rope. But they signed the pledge. And here is the documented fate of that gallant 56. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter, trader, saw his ships swept from the seas. To pay his debts, he lost his home and all of his properties and died in rags. Thomas Lynch Jr., who signed that pledge, was a third-generation rice grower, aristocrat, large plantation owner. After he signed, his health failed. His wife and he set out for France to regain his failing health. Their ship never got to France, was never heard from again. Thomas McKean of Delaware was so harassed by the enemy that he was forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in Congress without pay, his family in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery and Clymer and Hall and Gwinnett and Walton and Hayward and Rutledge and Middleton. Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia raised $2 million on his own signature to provision our allies, the French fleet. After the war, he personally paid back the loans, wiped out his entire estate, and he was never reimbursed by his government. In the final battle for Yorktown, he, Nelson, urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, own home, which was occupied by Cornwallis. It was destroyed. Thomas Nelson Jr. had pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. The Hessians seized the home of Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey. Francis Lewis had his home and everything destroyed, his wife imprisoned. She died within a few months. Richard Stockton, who signed that declaration, was captured, mistreated, his health broken to the extent that he died at 51. His estate was pillaged. Thomas Hayward Jr. was captured when Charleston fell. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in all directions for their lives. His fields and grist mill were laid waste. For more than a year, he lived in forests and caves and returned home after the war to find his wife dead, his children gone, his properties gone, and he died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris saw his land destroyed, his family scattered. Philip Livingston died within a few months from the hardships of the war. John Hancock, history remembers best due to a quirk of fate rather than anything he stood for. That great sweeping signature attesting to his vanity towers over the others. One of the wealthiest men in New England. And yet he stood outside Boston one terrible night of the war. And he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar, if the public good requires it." So he too lived up to the pledge. Of the 56, few were long to survive. 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes from Rhode Island to Charleston sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, or burned. 2 lost their sons in the army. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died in the war from its hardships or from its more merciful bullets. I don't know what impression you had of the men who met that summer in Philadelphia. But I think it's important that we remember this about them. They were not poor men. They were not wild-eyed pirates. These were men of means. They were rich men, most of them, and had enjoyed much ease and luxury in their personal living. Not hungry men, certainly not terrorists, not irresponsible malcontents, not fanatical incendiaries. These men were prosperous men, wealthy landowners. They were substantially secure in their prosperity. They had everything to lose. But they considered liberty, and this is as much as I shall say of it. They had learned that liberty is so much more important than security, that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom was born.
In similar fashion, God has done the same thing for you and I. He's got a book that he calls the Holy Bible, and in that book, there's a chapter of Hebrews, chapter 11, that defines all of those who laid down their lives for liberty. When Jesus Christ is coming back, and Satan is trying to destroy that liberty, and he's calling upon you and I and people all around this world to declare liberty to this world, because Jesus Christ is going to come back, and finally, once and for all, he's going to set man free. Satan will be put away, and he will usher in the foundation of the kingdom of God. And you and I have a part of that plan. July 4th, the conclusion of the Declaration of Independence says this: "We, therefore, as representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions." They're talking to God, is where they're bringing this to. "So that in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that the United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that was free and independent states, that they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract allegiances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may have the right to do." God's jump-off point. So we talk a lot more about this. I'm going to offer you another sermon. This is an additional sermon that follows up on what we're talking about from last year. That should be online, I think, still from last year. I'm getting a heads up from our control booth over there, so that if you haven't seen this sermon yet, it's called God's Jump-Off Point at the corner of July 4th, 1776 and Tammuz 17. It goes into a lot more information about Tammuz 17 in addition to the sermon that I'm going to be offering you in just a couple more minutes. All right, so now let's bring this to a close as we wrap up our program here. And we're going to talk about the newsletter that's going out this week. In fact, it might even be in your mailbox when you get this program today. July 4th, all right, so we're offering Proclaiming Liberties to the Captives. I just delivered that sermon last Sabbath. It's going to be available to all of you. It'll be online in just a few weeks, so you really want to see that sermon. Now, if you're not on the mailing list, get on the mailing list. This is a powerful letter that we're talking about the flag of the United States and how the LGBT flag wants to be flown with the United States flag. So we're taking the nation established by God, and Satan is trying to encroach upon that flag to bring about his way of life at the same time. So I go into that in this newsletter. So if you're not on the mailing list, please, it doesn't cost you anything. Just write in and say, listen, add me to the mailing list. And you're going to get a newsletter and a quarterly, 3-4 times a year, and a new video offering every single month, all absolutely free of charge. So please follow up and get on that. In the mail last week, 2 sermons. The first one was What is Grace by Bobby Weber. It was a sermon, it wasn't a sermon, it was our news and nuggets for June 6th, D-Day. There was another special we just did. Really, really upbeat, powerful message. So you need to get that, that video, or you can go online. You can go to God's Unchanging Word, look into News Nuggets Archives, and you'll find it right there. All right, so I think that's it for our program, is it? That's it. There you have our program today. As always, we want to close our program with an upbeat video. And what can be more upbeat than Kate Smith? And this is one of the original versions from way back of Kate Smith introducing God Bless America. And we can't bring it in before the shark gets by. All right, there goes the shark. All right, let's look at the video and I'll be right back to close our program.
Of our program, Miss Kate Smith.
Hello, everybody. It is my happy privilege to introduce a new song, God Bless America. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean. Goodbye, Daddy.
Bye, Dad. Don't be late.
No. White with foam. God bless America, my home.
Right, Pop? Right, son.
God bless America, land that I love. Beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America.
Kind of makes you think of Blake, doesn't it? Makes you think of a lot of things. We're going to be in this yet, Mom.
Hello, son.
Hi, Mom.
Hello, darling.
New song?
Brand new, first time in the air.
Brand new, my eye. You know, I threw that song out of Yip Yip Yap Yank 22 years ago. Sounds better now.
Well, that's it for our program today. From all of us here at God's Unchanging Word, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great 4th of July. Don't forget, share this with all your friends. They're going to love you for it. Or not. Till next week, God be with you.